Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah Liz and I have two videos for you today. So this is part one of stretching your supplies, and we are going to make an epic Halloween card. I can't get over this little graveyard scene and her feet sticking up out of the back of there. And then there's a little shaker in the cauldron. We are going to do tons of techniques and tons of fun things here. But then in the next video, we're going to stretch these supplies to make something for Christmas. So I have the Kat Scrappiness Witch's Brew die set. That's all of the leg pieces and the cauldron all go together. And then I also have the Spooky Boo word die. For some fun Halloween accents, I have the Crafter's Essential Halloween die set. It has all the spooky things that you need. Then I have the 3D pop-up box die set. This is such a great box card die because it's wider than a lot of them, but it still fits in an A2 envelope. So I cut the base for that box card out, and I'm going to do some ink blending on the background, okay? I have some milled lavender, and I'm just making a little spot for my moon. I cut that moon out with the Halloween set. I promise I'm not doing anything really fancy here. I'm creating a light spot for the moon since that's going to give off this glow. So I come in with my lightest ink, that's the milled lavender. And then I'm going around that with broken china. Next, I'll bring in some Uncharted Mariner, which it has to be my very favorite blue. And I'm going around the broken china and covering up the rest of the background, okay? I'll bring in chipped sapphire to deepen up the edges. And then I'll bring in some Villainous Potion. And then I just kind of go back over some of those transition points to soften that up a little bit and create a better blend. I started with dark cardstock, and that's doing a lot of the work for me. If I had started with white cardstock, this would take a lot longer and it would just be a little bit more challenging. But keep in mind, this is also the background on a box card where I'm going to add all the things. So I'm not super worried about it being perfect. The box card comes with 3 tiers of pieces for all of your elements that you're going to layer into it. And I'm using 2 of the largest and 1 of the medium. I cut a bunch because I wasn't sure what I needed, but really 2 of the largest, 1 of the medium. That way there's enough of the panel to work with. So when I'm tearing pieces off, I've got something to hang on to. Then once I kind of get everything torn, I'll be able to ink blend, and that rough edge is going to pick up the ink in some really, really cool ways. So I'm coming in with peeled paint distress ink and bringing that down from the top. And that is going to pick up all those different layers and textures of green. And then after we go through all of the tops, I'll bring in some of that black soot from the bottom. And that just gives me all kinds of different depth and dimension. It feels kind of spooky. And I really, really love how these turned out. I've had this shade of green cardstock in my stash for about 10 years. And I never really had a reason to use it. I mean, it's a nearly full pack of cardstock, and this was it. That was absolutely the perfect color to start with. Here, I'm bringing in a couple tombstones, and they have this really great etch detail in them. I wanted to be able to get some variation in how much black soot ink I'm adding. So I'm using a tiny little blending brush. These are new, I think, from Kat Scrappiness, or new-ish, and they're the perfect size for this. When I go to ink blend on this spooky tree, I'm going to use another of those small blending brushes, but I've put the tree onto a sticky mat just to hold it in place so I don't bend any of those branches or cause problems for myself. I'm not trying to pay attention to where a light source would be or anything like that. I'm just trying to get some layers of texture in there to keep everything from looking too clean and perfect. This fence I cut from some matte silver cardstock, and I'm going to grab 2 shades of alcohol marker, and I'm going to just make some scribbles over top of the fence. So that was a medium gray, and this is a pretty dark gray. And I'm going to hold it up for you here in just a minute, and it does not look great. And I knew that, I was prepared. just scribbles. But then I'm going to use my rag. This is just for cleaning up stuff in the craft room. And I sprayed some 91% isopropyl alcohol on there, and I'm just dabbing against that alcohol marker. I was watching Caitlin Anthony make a card from Caitlin Anthony Cards, one of her Halloween cards, and she was really struggling because she had accidentally used a paper that had sort of a waxy coating on it. And so she did her alcohol marker coloring, but it wasn't blending well. And so that's kind of what she did. She used isopropyl alcohol and dabbed against it. And I was like, I don't know when I'll need that information, but I just filed it away. And then I used it like 2 days later on this fence. So for a lot of my die cuts, I'm going to stack them up. They are hanging off the card. It's a box card, so they're kind of sticking up in the air. And I just like them to be a little bit sturdier. So I used some extra gray cardstock behind the fence, and then behind the tree. Obviously, I don't have something quite that color. I'd rather it be darker on the back than lighter when I'm creating a moody scene. As I glue each of these pieces together, I just bring in my little pokey tool to remove any of that glue that kind of seeps out of the edges. But yeah, they went together pretty easily. These are the witch's legs. I love this set. It's so funny. So the set is originally designed for the witch's legs to stick out of a shaker cauldron. But I really love showing you guys ways to get more out of your dies and use them in ways maybe other than what they were designed to do. So the shaker cauldron is absolutely adorable. I will link to the Kat Scrappiness website. Like, there's lots of pictures using it like that. But we're gonna, I wanted to do something a little bit different. So I cut the backer panel for the legs. There's 2 of them. And then the polka dot tights. I cut it out of some black sparkle glitter cardstock. And then I cut 1 leg from green and 1 leg from purple and just saved the dots. And I am mixing and matching, so I have these sort of purple and green polka dot tights for our witch's leg. I'm having to kind of hunt around a little bit only because I'm mixing and matching. Otherwise, they go in really, really easily. Here are the shoes, and there's these little like buckles that go on the shoes. And I'm going to hold that up. There's a little indentation kind of in the middle of that. My plates are a mess. Like, I use them until they fall apart. And so normally that would be a little more impressed, and I think I would just leave it. But I wanted more definition since it didn't impress real well with my plates. And I'm just bringing in a black alcohol marker and going right in that center area where the indentation was. Then I will go ahead and add those onto my boots. These are so funny. Like, they've got those little twirly bits, but that also makes me think of elf shoes. So I mentioned earlier, there are 2 videos coming out today. This first one, we're making our epic Halloween graveyard scene. But in the next one, we're going to turn those into some elf feet because there are also striped stockings. And we're going to make it so that the legs swing from an ornament. Okay, I'll show you a picture of that at the end, and I will link to that video at the end. I just had so much fun making these, but then by the time I went all out on both of them, the video was kind of long. So I just separated them to maybe make it easier to navigate. So I've added my boot to the bottom of our tights here, and then I'm gonna add a second boot to the back. The front of the boot is a glossy black cardstock, and so the back of it's white, and I didn't want that. I could have just markered it in, but again, for sturdiness, since they're sticking right out in the air, it made the most sense to me to just cut that again from some black cardstock. I was already cutting lots of things twice. We are going to pack so much into this box card that honestly, I probably should have just made 2 box cards. Like, there are some elements I really love that you can't see as well as I might have liked. So you'll have to let me know what your favorite elements are. I might make another one of these. What would you keep if you were going to pare this back and leave just your favorites? I'm about to put the box card together, and I was like, you know what? We need a little bit more here. So I went around with some regular black soot ink, not the oxide, but just regular old black soot. And then I am going to splatter it with some purple metallic paint and glossy black paint. And I was trying something new. This is what I get. I was trying something new, tapping my paintbrush with the back of a marker. There's some big splotches, but we'll cover them up. I am not worried about them. To put this together, I am just going to stick my thumb right in the score line created by the die, and I will fold those 2 flaps in. And then on each of these 3 pieces, there's a tab on either side. And I find it easiest to stick my thumb into the score line, bend it slightly towards me, and then away. Okay, because otherwise I sometimes can't quite find it. And if I fold it crooked, the box card doesn't always go together quite the way I want it to. So then I'm going to add my 1/4 inch double-sided tape on each of those flaps. These 3 pieces will fit into the box card without trimming anything, okay? But I am not an exact crafter. And so on the piece in the back, I am going to trim just a little bit off of each side. You have to do both sides. You can't do just one, all right? I like to start at the front. That way I know I have a nice even transition from the side of the box card to the front of the box card. And I'm going to pull off that release paper and then also add glue so that if I don't get it quite right, I can pull it off before I press too firmly and then it's stuck forever. For the second one, I am going to butt that right up against the other flap. Okay, so I'm removing the release paper and then I'm going to add my wet glue again. It gives me a little bit of wiggle room. I'm going to fold that back. I'm going to butt the score line up against the other tab, and then I'm lining this one up at the bottom of the box. I checked it. It's going to work well that way. If you were putting this together without tearing edges and mixing and matching pieces, you could just line them all up along the bottom. But I obviously had to be a little extra about it. So I am going to kind of pull this back one up a little further. I want to make sure you can see all the layers. So I'm not going to have elements that get hidden. I'm going to hold that in there, release paper, wet glue. Okay, I'm folding that back. And now I have a little wiggle room to figure out where that's going to go. It will fit, all 3 of them butted right up against each other, but you've got to butt them up tightly. Okay, so just a heads up on that. So you can kind of see how this will go together, but I want to add some of my elements before I do that, just so that it's easier to get my fingers in there and make sure things are glued down really well. This BOO, I don't know why I needed it so thick, but I was like, we're going to cut out 5 layers of each letter. If you don't like stacking die cuts, try it this way. I just line them up. So for these B's, I'm going to add glue to 3 of them. And then I'm going to use my pickup tool to pick up, not the shiny one. And then I press and hold for a sec and press and hold. And then when I have a stack of 4, I will make sure it's all neat and tidy and all the edges are lined up straight. I found that my pickup tool did not love trying to pick up the glossy cardstock, that metallic cardstock, and hang on through a whole bunch of layers. So that's why I did that one separately. But actually, it was really, really quick. So, I made a shaker card not that long ago for the Crafty Quacko release where I stacked up a bunch of tiny die cuts, and that's how I did it. And so that's how I'm going to do it for the rest of eternity. It's so slick. I've kind of laid out some of my elements, and I'm just figuring out where things are going to go. I'm trimming off one side of my fence because it didn't have really any of that marker, and I was like, that's no fun. And I need to figure out how to make this fit. So I've glued down my tree. That's the only thing I've glued so far. And then when I go to add this fence, I'm adding glue just kind of to the bottom. And I'm going to butt that right up against the flap. You can see how this is easier to do before the whole box is closed up. And then I will press that down, and I can fold back the flap on the right side and just trim the little tiny edges of the fence to make it fit perfectly. If I had the box all the way together already, I would have to do all the trimming before I glued it down, and that was going to be extra challenging. Next, I'm adding my witch's legs. I have added some double-sided tape on here because that is a glitter cardstock, and sometimes my wet glue doesn't like to adhere very quickly, and I'm impatient. I really love the spirit of this die set as it was intended to be used, with like the legs sticking up out of somewhere goofy. And so I felt like we were still able to capture that here with the legs sticking up out of the graveyard, sort of an odd proportion to the rest of it. Once I get the placement for the legs, I can start gluing down the BOO. I have the cauldron right below it. I wanted the BOO to kind of look like it was bubbling up out of the cauldron and oozing something. But you can see the cauldron doesn't quite fit. It's hanging out the bottom. So we're going to end up cutting off the bottom and no one will know. It's going to work great. Once my BOO is in place, we can start working on our shaker. So I'm going to kind of pick things up and move things around, and I'm making a little mark on the cauldron so I know where to trim that off. And I'm going to put the shaker frame, there's two separate dies, so the shaker frame and the backer, I'm going to tape those together so I cut them to be exactly the same size, and that's going to simplify things a little bit later on. I also have it cut out of a piece of acetate, and then I have one more shaker frame that is the glossy black cardstock that I used for the witch's boots. I just like that little bit of shine that it adds, a little pop of something extra. Plus it's a cauldron, right? It should be a shiny, well, maybe it should be a dirty cauldron or whatever, but I like a shiny cauldron. I'm here for it. I'm going to add my acetate with just a little bit of liquid glue. It looks like a lot, but it's a super thin layer so that it's not going to ooze out of the sides. When I press along that glue, I'm sort of pressing towards the outside instead of in towards the middle where I have that acetate. And then I will just trim off the acetate from the bottom as well. There are a ton of Halloween mixes that just came out from Kat Scrappiness, and I'm trying to figure out which ones I want. I know I like the purple that's in the witch's legs, and I wanted more of that. So I grabbed two, and we're going to do a little mixing. We're going to create our own little shaker brew. And then I am adding black foam tape to put my shaker together. Okay. If you don't have black foam tape, you can use white foam tape and just use like a Sharpie or a black alcohol marker and go along the edges. I just felt like the white foam tape would have been a really stark contrast, even if it is just from the side. So yeah, for me, that was a big deal here. So I've added some of my ghosts and sequins. I like the shine of that BOO-TACULAR mix. And then I am grabbing some little bats and some of the little like RIP pieces from this other graveyard shift sprinkle mix. I will link a bunch of the Halloween mixes below because her sprinkle mixes are really affordable, and I think she's got some amazing options right now. I'm going to go around the edge of that foam tape with some wet glue just to make sure I have a little bit of wiggle room to get this on here just right. And then I like to pick it up in my hand and use my fingers right around the edges to make sure everything is lining up perfectly. And you're not going to see the back of the cauldron where you shouldn't see a back of the cauldron, if that makes sense. I've layered up my gravestones because I forgot to do that earlier. And now we're going to close up our box. I opened it all the way, and I am one at a time closing my green pieces to make sure they are parallel to the bottom of the card. They need to be parallel or I'm going to have some issues getting things to fold flat and then open correctly. And I will remove the double-sided backers and add my little bit of wet glue. Then I just fold that flap on the right over into the adhesive. The double-sided tape gives me that instant grab, but that wet glue would have let me pick it up if I needed to in case I got it wrong. Once my box is closed, I'm adding my cauldron, but it's sitting a little further to the left than I want because the top of the cauldron is narrower than the width, the rounded piece of the cauldron. So I just took my scissors and chopped it off. It works because I didn't go past that foam tape. I hopeful that that was what was going to happen, but I'd be lying if I told you that I was certain of that. Of course, at this point, I'm recognizing that I forgot to put together the bubbling brew for my cauldron. This would have been way easier to add before I put the shaker together. But have no fear, we're going to make it work. So there's this purple backer piece that I cut out of some shimmering purple cardstock, and then I cut a bunch of extra pieces that were supposed to be for tights, right? Those polka dot tights. And I am just adding on some extra little circles and some lighter purples and a black glitter cardstock. And then I'm going in with my white gel pen just to add some accents and a little bit of extra interest. Then there is this purple piece that it layers on top of. It's there to help you add it inside the cauldron. I trimmed it only because I'd already put the shaker together. If you do this first, you don't need to trim it. So I am using the tip of my glue and just running it right inside there. And then I'm going to use my pokey tool to press down on that. And I'm just wiping off any extra glue, trying to make sure I don't get it everywhere. Okay, and then I can add my bubbling piece on top of that. And it's actually going to sit up higher than I think it was intended, but I just needed a way to attach it, and this worked out just fine. So now I can go ahead and add my shaker to the bottom. You can kind of see through that acetate there's foam tape along the bottom. It's just not covered up by any cardstock. It doesn't matter. It's going to be down inside the graveyard and no one's going to see it. I am being careful when I add the glue not to put it all the way at the bottom of the cauldron because it's going on the third tier in the back that doesn't go all the way down to the bottom of the card. And I didn't want a bunch of adhesive everywhere. And I'm just using my hands to kind of check, like, where is the bottom of the cauldron? Is it level with the card? I didn't want it to come down any further, or I was going to have problems with the card standing upright. When I picked it up, my moon fell off because I should have probably glued that down first, and I just forgot. So we're going to use some tweezers. These are reverse tweezers from Kat Scrappiness that are so pretty. And I feel like the pointy part of it is a little longer than some. So I was easily able to get that moon right down onto the spot that I had ink blended for it. And then I'm going to take my gravestones and I'm going to add those to my scene. That RIP does, I think it does pop all the way out. Mine didn't fall out of the die, but I just put some tape behind it. And then when I glued the next one on there, right, the second one to sort of strengthen it, then it was all glued and sandwiched together. As a finishing touch, I added a little bat flying over the gold boo, and that will finish up card number 1. Here's the other card that's coming. It's the same die set, right? I hope you'll join me for video number 2. I will link it at the end. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and I will see you next time.